It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to focus on the UFC, specifically Dana White and Mark Shapiro. But before we get into that, we do have a couple of minor updates that we want to discuss. But first, let's check in with John and see how his week has been, because you are back home in the cold.
Yeah, and it's cold. I mean, it's the wind chill specifically that's cold, really cold.
How cold? What are we talking?
Well, today I think the high was 12, but it got colder the further the day went along. It's right now. It's got to be around 0 and wind chill negative 15 or something like that.
Did you say the high? The high is 12.
Yeah, it was cold today, man. It got cold. Yeah, right now is actually, no, I take that back. In the morning, it was warmer. It was like high 23, but as the day got on, even as it got later in the afternoon, it got cold, even when the sun came out. So a cold front came in, and now we are at 0 right now, but with wind chill, it is feeling much colder. I think it's negative 16, it says, with wind chill.
My gosh, that's insanity. I mean,
yeah, wait to January, February, when I will not be here, but it can get worse. I'm
out here with it. It says it's 44 degrees. It's 10:15 at night, and it's 44 degrees here in Texas, and I'm over here like, it's a little bit chilly. And you're over there in 12 degree as a high. The high today is 12.
You don't have to rub it in. It's not like I chose it to be 12 degrees.
I know, but it's so funny, the high.
Yeah. It's the high. I mean, let's focus on the high, not the low. The low is terrible.
All right, so we're going to jump right in here, and let's start with our 2 updates. And the first one, man, I hate this Global Fight League thing. I just want to get that out on the table to start. But the first question is about the Global Fight League, and that it has gone public finally. Now, we talked about the Global Fight League a month ago, okay? A month ago. But now they finally come out. Their CEO went on Ariel Helwani's show earlier today. Now, what was your take on all that?
Well, I mean, they're public, so obviously they have some sort of we had questions about the amount of investment they had, or they've triggered stuff. So it seems like, yes, they've got their investors, or they got some investment because they're going ahead, and at least they're going to make the attempt. So the concern we had that it wouldn't even get this far, that has been proven unfounded. They have gotten this far. I do have questions though, because if I remember right, how many, if you remember on the deck we had that we shared with everybody, look at that. We're sharing information before anybody else gets it. We had, how many teams did they originally have listed on that Global Fight Network, the Global Fight League thing?
I am not sure. I just know that they're talking about 20 now and a roster of 300.
Well, they're talking about, what they're talking about is eventually 20 teams, but they're talking about right now they're going to start off with 6 teams.
6
is going to be 6 teams is going to be the beginning. The first thing they do is going to be 6 teams in a draft and stuff. So 20 fighters per team. Players, I'm saying all that stuff. Jesus Christ, they're fighters. 20 fighters per team. But I want to know, the original deck we had, they announced that they were going to have 8 teams. So they've already scaled it back to 6 teams. And they haven't announced the locations yet, so I'm guessing they're financing whatever investment they had put in is not as big as they'd hoped for. So they've scaled back, or they're not have the interest in the franchises. The other thing, we have still no idea what their broadcast partners are. There's just still a bunch of questions, and that doesn't even get talking. Is the concept sound? That's the other part. There's one is, where's the money coming from? What is the broadcast partners? How will they make money? That's one part of the equation. The other part is the concept itself sound.
Let me give you my take on the concept.
Oh, I'm intrigued to hear this. Let's hear this.
We saw the IFL fall flat on its face when we tried the team concept. And further, they were doing it with young athletes, with athletes that some of them are still fighting today. And I'm looking at you, Big Ben Rothwell. There are so many problems with this, but my main problem is the collective age of all of these fighters that they claim to have signed already. I mean, we've got 48-year-olds on this roster. I mean, the only recognizable names on there that are under the age of 40 is like recently released Robelli Despain from the UFC, the heavyweight that was so god-awful. I think they cut him on his second fight. You know, I mean, This is just nothing but old and older and washouts. It's embarrassing.
It's sad to say. No, you're right. Keep going. Keep going.
And then you have some of these guys you will recognize from those, what do you call them when they wrote in for the antitrust and they wrote all of their
declarations.
Their declarations, yes. They wrote these declarations, and the one that sticks out to me the most, Fabricio Verdum's declaration talked about an inoperable cyst in the center of his brain that his physicians were keeping a very close eye on. Why do you have this guy signed? Why do you have Vanderlei Silva signed when he talked about thinking that he had CTE and that, you know, he needed this money desperately for medical and this and that and the other? I mean, my goodness, how do they put this in good conscience together with those fighters?
That's a good question. I mean, you can understand why the fighters, if they're desperate for money, they're still going to be desperate. They desperately want to fight. That's that's the problem with fighters. They always need to fight because they don't have any money left over.
Right.
And in some of these cases, some of these fighters maybe should have saved their money better. I don't, because people will complain and point out that, Vanderlei made over 10 million. And yes, and maybe he should have done better investments, but you do not know. I think people miss, some people do financially plan properly. I think Shane Carwin's an example. He made a lot of money compared to other fighters, but I don't think he could have planned on losing his engineering degree the way he did, that it wouldn't pan out the way he thought it would. So there's a lot of complaints there, but for me, the couple big things with this one is the team concept. The concept they're doing is just another gimmick that everybody comes up with. People come up with gimmicks because they do not want to compete directly with the UFC and other promotions. They can't compete with top fighters, so they go out and they get a gimmick. We're going to have Bellator, we're going to have tournaments, nonstop tournaments. PFL, we're going to have a season. It's going to be like a real sport. These guys are taking the IFL playbook. And their thing is all the fans will come around because they'll cheer for teams. And we know people don't give a shit about teams in combat sports. People don't give about leagues. People don't give about tournaments, and they don't care about seasons. What they care about are fighters. That they care about are basically the best fighters, seeing who are the best and seeing them in big fights. So that's one. They're going to try to bring back another gimmick thinking that'll work. And I just really have doubts. Wish them best of luck, but I sincerely doubt, because the history of combat sports show us no one gives a shit about teams for combat sports. The other part is the stars they get, the names. They're so well past their prime. I don't get they won't have any impact. In fact, they're going to be a negative because, as you point out, a lot of these guys are too old and beat up to even be fighting. So you're going to have that on your conscience, and the image of your team is going to see a lot of old guys that shouldn't be fighting get stretched out and taken away in an ambulance after a fight, if they do fight. Just because Frank Mir used to be a big fighter, a top fighter who could put his name in a title weight fight, you could probably add to the pay-per-view buys in the gate. Just because the same with Fabricio Verdum and Junior Dos Santos and all those guys doesn't mean they do that anymore. It's sad to say. One of the problems with MMA, I think, is a lot of people look at it almost like pro wrestling, right? Like you bring out the Undertaker at age, whatever age that guy is now, right? A lot of these wrestlers, Ric Flair I remember he was in his 50s and people were still dragging him out. I'm sure they still drag him out now. He was dragged out
well into his 70s and competing.
See, that's okay. That's just the saddest fucking thing ever. But anyways, that proves my point. In pro wrestling, you could drag these old men out who could never compete, and fans will still get excited. They'll give the pop, as they call it, and they'll all get excited. They get to watch them because it's not a sport. I don't want to pro wrestling fans. I'm not trying to be mean here, but it's literally not a sport. It's the recreation of a sport. It's a simulation of a sport. So you can, one of the benefits is like we're in real sports where old men can't compete. In pro wrestling, we can go, hey, guess what? In the magic world of pro wrestling, we can bring old dudes in and they can compete. So you can do that. You can keep people way past their prime in pro wrestling. And I think a lot of fans and MMA kind of view it the same way, but it's not true. Fans, as much as MMA owes something to pro wrestling, it's still a combat sport. And people might recognize the names, but if they can't compete at the top level, they don't draw. The vast majority of fans don't care. When you're past your prime, they just give up on you. They move on to the next thing. They care about the top guys. And as we talked about last week with what PFL, what they have to do is going to run in the same trouble as the PFL, even more so, is that what the history of combat sports show us is what people care about is watching the best fighters, the top fighters in big fights. That's the number one thing. And the reason the UFC can do this is they got 90% of the top fighters, and it makes it very easy to book big fights. The other promotions struggle with that because maybe they have a top fighter, but they can't make a big fight, or they can only do one off at a time. And people are so used to the UFC that they every month doing this that they kind of ignore the other promotion. And so the problem for Global Fight League is going to be they don't have top guys at all. I don't want to, I'm trying not to, mock the fighters that they sign, but none of them, all these guys that they listed, the old names, I'm sure they're going to have a ton of young guys to round it out because they're not going to spend that much on everybody. But all these guys that they named, almost all of them were top fighters, were some of the best fighters we have seen in MMA. None of them are top 10, top 15. I doubt any of them are top 20 anymore fighters. So you have no top fighters here. And so we are not going to see top fighters in big fights. There's no real drama. There's no unfinished business we got to see. Plus the league format denies you the possibility of putting fighters together anyways in some sort of maybe there is a grudge match some fans are waiting to see, but none of them here. I see nothing here that's going to connect with fans.
I saw a graphic that they actually put out. I think you replied to it. One of Jedi Goodman's, or is it Jed Mishu? Whatever. Jed, the guy that always retweets Ariel's stuff.
Yeah. Jed Mishu is the guy at MMA Fighting. Jedi Goodman is the guy that retweets Ariel.
Yes, Jedi Goodman. Okay. So he put out a little blurb of information, and then he put out this graphic that had all these names. It was 50 names from the GFL. And at the top of it, it said the top 50 most followed athletes for the GFL. So they're using that as a metric, how many followers they have.
Yeah, that's not a great metric.
That's in their deck. That's crazy to have that as a metric in your deck.
Yeah, and we should have cross-referenced, and I didn't do this. I got lazy, and I even forgot about thinking about doing this, is I should have looked up and seen how much of the Global Fight League, how many of those fighters are on that list that they had of their targeted fighters. Because I'm betting I know Kevin Lee was on the list.
Yes.
They got him, and Woodley they got him, and Verdum. So I'm looking at the first page, Pettis, 4, Junior Dos Santos, 5, Hector Lombard, Luke Rockhold, Nurmagomedov. So they got like 8 of the 16 on the first page. So they got a lot of them. And I guess there's a reason they probably got a lot of them because they're not signed anywhere. And there's a reason they're not signed anywhere.
Yeah. Because they're pretty used goods, to put it lightly. I mean, the last time we saw Luke Rockhold fight, he was eating his teeth after Mike Perry put him down his throat.
Yeah, these guys are, let's not be mean, they're past their prime. Why is there 2 Kevin Lees on their list of top targeted fighters? They got Kevin Lee twice. Is he that big in demand that they have to name him twice? Benson Henderson, Gegard Mousasi, and they have I think they have Rampage Jackson's face in front of Gegard Mousasi.
Oh, you know what's funny is, when you watch some of the old movies and somebody's trying to get over on somebody else for like craps or a gambling debt or something, and the one I remember it most is Smokey in the movie Friday, and he's counting off the money to Big Worm. He said 20, 40, 60, and then he flips it over. 80, 100. That's what it reminded me of when you said they had Kevin Lee on there twice.
Well, it's a winning formula having Kevin Lee twice. But the other thing I want to point out is not only do they not have not only doing the format that fans really want to see, and not only are they putting on top fighters again in big fights, these guys aren't coming cheap. As we talked about last time, we've talked to a few people that are negotiated with them, and they have listed in here in their deck what the contractual terms they're kind of offering fighters. Like proven pay-per-view draws get $1 million guaranteed per year, and then elite normal, $300,000 to $500,000, elite fighter big name 100, and then top global prospect $50K is their base that they start with, plus they get retirement money and everything. Not even getting the percentage, the 50% split, which is absurd. We can talk about that in a second. But you add up all the fighters they're going to have, that's a sizable amount of money they're going to have to pay, because I know I've talked to a few people, some of the fighters that are getting the proven pay-per-view draw $1 million contracts, I would not say they're proven pay-per-view draws, especially at this point in their career. And there's a number of fighters who are going to get that kind of contract. I mean, it's for multiple fights, but still, you add that up for a season. They're going to have to generate some revenue or have a serious investment, deep pockets to go ahead with this venture.
Also, promoting it amongst media and so on and so forth, nobody pays attention anymore. If you're not from the new Yahoo vertical, Ariel Helwani's thing, or an influencer with the UFC, nobody really pays attention much to any kind of media coverage, any kind of op-eds or really nice in-depth coverage and analysis and things like that. If somebody were to write a really nice post about the GFL, about 5 people will read it. Nobody cares, and nobody certainly cares about an upstart organization coming in with nothing but old dudes and rejects.
Yeah, that's it. No one. That's what I don't get. I don't get the appeal. They think in some way. I think they think MMA fans. The pool of UFC fans and MMA fans are synonymous. They're not. There's not an overlap, and an MMA fan and a UFC fan is not quite the same thing.
Nope.
And so there's, people have been conditioned to be UFC fans, and they've conditioned not to pay attention outside the bubble, and they've been able to get away with that because for the most part there is nothing outside the bubble to pay attention to. The landscape has changed. The fan base has changed. I mean, if you go back 15 years ago, it was a different fan base. People, like I said, a large number of fans seem to be interested only in the gambling aspect. You go back 15 years ago, a huge number of fans were signing up for jiu-jitsu and other type of combat sports to try out, to get into martial arts from watching it. I don't see that anymore. They were interested in, more likely to follow fighters. So they're more likely to tune into another MMA promotion back then. I don't see that anymore. So it's an uphill battle, and you're not going to win them over with these guys. I mean, PFL, this is where I'll give PFL credit after we kind of crapped on them last week, is it's just, as much people, might mock them for getting Francis Ngannou. That's the people you need to get if you're going to make a splash in this industry.
And you can't keep putting the fights with that one in places where, one, nobody can get to them, and 2, nobody can watch them because they're on in the middle of the day. I mean, that's pretty bad to have Francis Ngannou fight Tyson Fury on a Friday in the middle of the day.
Well, that's not a PFL problem. That's a Saudi problem. The thing about PFL, I'll give them a break on the Francis Ngannou fight, is because my understanding is they had a massive site fee. And so at least the Saudis are covering their ass and they're getting from their point of view, we're getting a free Francis fight to put on that doesn't cost us. We're not losing money like they are in every other event they're doing where they're losing money. The Francis one, which might have been the most expensive, might have been one of the few where they're not losing money or much money on. So I can understand why they would do that. But yeah, for the most part, they're not getting the press. They're not getting the attention. And you can't, you can't be a promotion that's going to compete in this space at the top level as an A-list promotion, as a competitor to the UFC, maybe not on par, but as considered also major league. If you can't put on top fights, the problem is if you can't put on the top fights, best fighters in big fights, it just at least occasionally, just a percentage of them. Let's say UFC can do 70%, 75, but if you can't do 20, 25% of them, then fans are automatically going to regulate you to the minor leagues. And as we know, fans don't like or don't care about the minor leagues nearly as much as they do as the major leagues. So if you can't, MMA is not a league sport. It's not a team sport. It's not, it doesn't have seasons. What it has is it has events, and on the events are fights that you care about and fighters that you care about. And so the trick is, can you get enough of them to get fans to start tuning in and to consider you no longer a minor league feeder system? And I think everybody thinks like, well, we can't do that because the UFC has everybody. So we will have a gimmick like teams or or season or some other gimmick that'll get us over the hump. And that will never work. I mean, maybe it'll work long enough with investors, but that's all they care about.
And then they have the other problem where if you only have old guys and washouts, where's your homegrown talent? So that maybe on the off chance somebody is watching, they get invested in some homegrown talent. Very much the same way people got invested in Patricio Pitbull and Patchy Mix and AJ McKee, because those were kind of homegrown inside of Bellator, and they gained enough interest where people would often say how much they wanted to see Patchy Mix against the top, bantamweight over here.
We've seen kind of an attrition on this where obviously Pride had just as many top guys as the UFC, so that's not a fair comparison. But Strikeforce could build up these guys that were, you could, at least fans of MMA would say that guy is really good. I want to see him. And one of the reasons they could is because the UFC didn't have as much of the top fighters locked up back then. We still had the Japanese MMA scene, so you could pit Gilbert Melendez and Josh Thompson, all these guys against some of the Japanese stars, and like, oh my God, Gilbert Melendez beat Shinya Aoki and Crusher Kawajiri, and now he's a legitimate. Those are some of the best guys in the world. He is obviously one of the best guys in the world. You had that way, and plus all the heavyweights still coming. That Pride had floating around after the death of Pride. So you had a way to build guys up, and then Bellator did the same when they signed basically everybody that was a decent fighter that wasn't in the UFC and put them in tournaments to build up their guys. But over time, the attrition process has been that as people aged out, you haven't been able to develop as many young guys to take their spots. So you have no one to put your homegrown talent. Who do you put them against to showcase that they're good? Not to rag on these guys, but beating up, Anthony Pettis years past his prime is not gonna make a fighter.
But I do have some questions for you on this, John. Number one, do you think the investment money might have come from Saudi? Because it seems like everybody and their mama wants to jump on the Saudi gravy train. So do you think that might be where some of the investment comes from?
I mean, it's possible, but my guess, based on their map that they gave, is that the money is coming from somewhere in United Arab Emirates in Dubai, because I think they listed that as one of the franchises in their deck. So, I mean, I guess we'll find out when the teams are rolled out. They said 4 different continents. So I am guessing that one of the teams will be based in Dubai, because on the list of their 8 teams, 8 markets, that was one of the locations given. So.
Second question, this is my only other question. As it stands right now, we have 6 teams, not 8. give me a rough estimate of what you think it would cost for them to do everything that they listed, all the way down to retirement funds and everything, just on the 6 teams. And then the second part of that is, what would it cost ballpark for what they want to do? 20 teams, 300 fighters.
Well, I mean, if you're just taking the 18, or let's just do 6 teams. They're going to do 6 teams. Their plan is they're going to give 50% of the revenue to the fighters, matching the pay that they've offered them. So they got to meet a bare minimum, and then another 10% on top of that for the retirement and pension and all that stuff, medical. So that's 60% of revenue, but you have to make the break-even point. So I'm going to guess that they would, they're going to do 20 some events, 25 events. I think they say they're going to do this year. I'm not sure. I'd have to double check that, but you were talking to pay all the fighters on that roster, especially all these old guys that are obviously asking for a lot more money. I don't think it's going to be, to start doing the numbers and the amounts that they want to do. I'm guessing they're going to have to generate, $20 million, maybe more. I mean, the whole thing too is who's picking up the tab on the broadcast deals, because that changes everything. If they have to pick up the tab on the broadcast deals, then that has to be deducted. And you have to pay for that as well.
Let's back up, because that's something that I don't think we've ever talked about, is when a promoter has to pick up the tab to put on a fight. Can you discuss that for a moment, please?
Okay, well, the usual way is in boxing, right? The boxing promoter puts on the event. They pay for the event in the arena experience. They take that out of the revenues from the arena and what they get paid from the license fee from the broadcaster. So they pay for that, but the broadcaster typically pays. Typically, the broadcaster, like boxing deal, will pay for the broadcast. They pay for the announcers. They pay for the camera crew. They pay for all that. And if it's a pay-per-view, they get to deduct that from expenses and then get a percentage of the pay-per-view, because they're the one, doing the broadcast. They get a share, usually about 5 to 10% of the pay-per-view revenue goes to the broadcaster, but you'll get a lot of free advertising out of it that way. So it kind of evens out. Now, the UFC says we do all the broadcasting ourselves. We handle that. So when you pay us our fee, we're going to charge you more, but we're going to take care of the broadcasting. We have our own trucks. We bring our own crews. So we cover all that. And then there's a lot of promotions starting out, and PBC did this too with their with Waddell and Reed when they're doing their time buys. Is they're given a spot on the network, but they have to pay for everything themselves. Either they have to hire their own crews, or they have to pay back the broadcaster for putting the event together. And the broadcaster cost can cost several $100,000 or even more. I mean, UFC. A pay-per-view costs a lot for the UFC, specifically because Joe Rogan probably gets paid a ton. But Bruce Buffer gets paid a bit. The announcing crew gets paid more. So that can add up. But there's wide variables and all that, and how much cost you want to cut. So if this GFL is doing these deals and they're expected to cover the cost of the production costs themselves and maybe even pay for the broadcast time for the first season to get it noticed, that's going to be a lot of money putting out. So I'm going to say, just based on a typical promotion like Bellator and Strikeforce, Bellator when they were not at Showtime and Viacom was actually paying them, and they're not handling the broadcast, the network is handling the broadcast. I'm going to imagine that they're going to have to make, to cover the cost of the fighters, just rough calculation what we have and the number of 2 proven pay-per-view draws per team, elite names per team, all that. They're going to have to generate in the neighborhood of $25 million, let's say, to break even. Now, if they got to spend more on the broadcast, then you can add more money onto that. And 25 million, people think that could be a lot. That's a lot of money to generate. There's an escape velocity with promotions and stuff. When you start making tons of money, it's nothing. But in the beginning, that's a lot of money for someone that does not have any proven attractions, no proven no ticket selling ability, no proven network deal. So we will see how they do.
Last question on Global Fight League. Is there anything in the deck that talks about sanctioning this new style, this new team effort?
I don't think it defies the regulations. They had them on. Ariel Helwani was talking about this. Will the athletic commissions sanction this? But really what they'll do is the team part, it's just you're booked for fights and you have a replacement guy if you can't fight. You have 2 people in each weight class. If you can't take the fight, we get the replacement. So people are out with medical leave, you will have a replacement available. And the other thing is the weight classes, all the weight classes are actually 10 pounds heavier, which is not by unified rules, but there's an easy way to get around it. They're just going to declare every fight a catch weight bout. So I don't think they'll run into problems with state regulators on those.
So nothing at all in there strikes you as, hey, regulators might look at this and do a double take. There's nothing.
Well, I think the part that strikes me is the people they're signing to fight.
Oh, well, yeah, that goes without saying, but I'm talking about just like the actual structure of it and all of that stuff.
No, I don't think any of that's going to matter because of they're not doing multiple fights in a night. They're not doing fights every week. Anything that crosses where you have to worry about the athletic commission putting a suspension on someone, there's none of that. No skipping drug testing that I can see. Their weight classes are different, but again, there's an easy out. You just declare everything a catch weight.
All right, so moving on with our second update, Mark Hunt. Now, he recently saw some movement in his appeal case. So what happened there?
Well, unfortunately for him, the movement was the Ninth Circuit notified him that they denied his appeal. I guess in a couple of weeks, we'll get their written opinion, so we'll know why they denied it, the reasoning. But his case is dead. The appeal court is your last option. And so his attempts to continue his case against the UFC and Brock Lesnar has been rejected by the Ninth Circuit, and that is the end of that case.
All right. So now we're going to move straight into the real meat of this episode. So this is all going to be things about Dana White. So the first question, this past weekend at the UFC 310 post-fight presser, Dana White said that the UFC is absolutely interested in some of the top tier stars that Rizin has, and even expressed interest in an atomweight division. Now, their president, Nobiyuki Sakakibara, we all know him from Pride. He used to run Pride. He was there with Dana, and they were chummed up. They were right next to each other. They were photographed. They were interviewed. They left together. What do you make of that? What is your take there?
Yeah, well, we talked about this a few weeks ago, I believe, or maybe on the Thanksgiving Q&A. I can't remember exactly. That it's the relationship to him. And it's not that surprising because it strikes me as what's happened is the UFC is still going to maybe hold events in Japan, but they've given up on kind of conquering Japan, insulting the earth like they did every other country they went into. That Japan is its own market. And Zach Arnold will always talk about this Fight Opinion, about how Japan has a specific audience for MMA. You have to do it a certain way, and the UFC is not willing to cater to the Japanese market the way that's necessary. So they were never able to accomplish what they wanted there. So it strikes me as what it is the UFC has decided that yes, we cannot conquer Japan, and Rizin and Sakakibara have decided that we cannot kind of compete with UFC outside of Japan, and so we are going to remain in Japan and do as good as we can. And so they've come to an agreement, and the agreement is that UFC can occasionally come to Japan. Rizin gets to run their shows there and be the top promotion in Japan. But because their fans, the hardcore fans and some of the fighters will want to prove themselves, we will let them go to the UFC. So the UFC gets the benefit of having these top fighters whenever they want coming to the UFC. And we also get the benefit of getting some Japanese stars to maybe sell some more, get some more viewers and sell some more pay-per-views when we sell shows in Japan. But overall, it's just, it's a mutually agreed that we will not go after each other like we did years ago. And I think that's it. They've come to terms with the idea that they both run kind of different businesses that really, as much as they're both in MMA and both in top level MMA, they're not in direct competition like other promotions are.
Does it tickle your brain any at all that maybe a sale might be happening?
No, I don't think there will be a sale. I don't think UFC is interested in buying Rizin. It's just doing business in Japan's a headache. But I think there's I take that back. There's always a chance they put some money into Rizin, like a small percentage to have a stake. But I don't think that's it. I think Rizin's going to be a Japanese company, but they're working a way where both of them will get more out of it. It's for once, the UFC is doing a win-win situation with another promotion. Rizin gets the benefit that their fighters get more attention, get to leave the Rizin to fight top fighters without actually leaving Rizin, get to go to the UFC, get to make more money potentially, but also get more attention as going out to fight the foreigners and on defense of Japanese MMA. And so Rizin benefits there, and then the UFC benefits because they get a place where they can get occasional stars out of Japan, and those stars will help them sell more in Japan, but they're not going to take over the market.
Dana also seemed to take an interest in Bellator athletes' plight. He even added how grim things were looking for them with the PFL. So do you read anything into that? Is he like maybe gearing up to open the doors for some of these guys?
Well, after some complaints, I noticed Nemkov and Corey Anderson got booked for a fight. I'm guessing some other big fighters will be booked into fights soon. What I think would happen is UFC would sign the first one or two Bellator fighters that get out of their deal. I think the UFC might sign to send a signal to the rest, but then I don't think they're going to be the purse won't be as open. The wallet won't be as wide open for the next batch of fighters because you're just trying to instigate a bunch of them to get pissed at the PFL and leave, I think would be the plan. But yeah, the PFL, the problem they're having is nothing new. If we talk about on the show all the time, they burn through a lot of money. I point out that the Ngannou fight didn't seem to burn through a lot, but that's one fight, which is shocking, the most expensive one. But their other shows, they are not making a ton of revenue. They were burning through tens of millions of dollars per year before this year. I'm sure they're burning through tens of millions of dollars now. And so that's a lot of money. I don't see forecast an immediate collapse. I think they're shooting for that TV deal. Let's see what happens after that. But at the same time, they signed all these fighters. My guess was they're not looking to book them because they prefer just having them on the roster as a selling piece instead of actually putting the events on with them. So, and that seems to be the situation right now.
I'm going to go back to the first question real quick about Rizin. I just have to ask really fast. It just occurred to me. Would you consider what's going on with Rizin and UFC? Would you call that co-promotion? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!